Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Presidential Hustings webinar. Took us a minute or two longer than we thought to set it all up, so apologies for a slightly late start. But we won't be niggledy with your time. We'll make sure that we give you a full hour, should you need it. So my name's Laura Lee. My posh name is Baroness Burt of Solihull, and my aide is Audrey Eager, who's going to rush around the table now and just wave so that you can see she does really exist. So Audrey is going to field any questions, any supplementary questions that you want to put that are kind of pertinent to the discussion. So the format is going to be that each candidate will have 6 minutes to speak. They've already drawn lots for this, so Mark is going to go first, Mark Pack, and Christine Jardine is going to go second. And then your questions, 45 minutes of those. We've already had a load in, so we've picked the questions to reflect different areas of interest, but do feel free to send in supplementary questions if you can. And can I thank everyone who took the trouble to send questions in, and apologise because unfortunately we didn't have time for them all. But I hope nevertheless that you'll find there's a good selection of questions, and my desire is to test these two people, not to destruction.
Thank you.
And also I'm going to try and keep them to time so that we can get as many questions in as possible. I have a clock, so there is no excuse, and hopefully we'll be able to get a really good selection of questions in. So without further ado, and then at the end we'll have closing statements, and they'll have 2 minutes each, and we'll start off first with Christine and then with Mark in reverse to what they're going to do now. So if we're ready,
Yep.
Mark, off you go.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for taking part in this webinar. My name's Mark Pack, and the reason I am standing to be your president is I want even more of us to be elected as councillors, as members of devolved assemblies, members of parliaments, and at all levels for us as a party to be bigger and more successful than ever before. And I think the role of party president is absolutely crucial to achieving that, to us as a party achieving more power, and therefore having that much greater ability to do things like stop Brexit, tackle climate change, deal with the horrific inequalities and tensions that there are in our society. And to do that, I've got a 5-point plan that I want to prioritise as your president. The first is unleashing the campaigning power of the hundreds of thousands of supporters we have at our grassroots, members, registered supporters, people have signed up to back our campaigns, making sure that everyone has the right tools, the right resources, the right training to campaign effectively for liberalism week in, week out. Secondly, making us the best digital campaigners in the country, really grasping the opportunity that the internet offers to campaign in ways far more effective than has ever been possible in the past. Thirdly, tackling our, frankly, somewhat patchy record at being good at diversity and inclusion, so that we as a party truly represent and look like the communities that we seek to represent, but also so that we give every member and every supporter in the party the opportunity to take part in the ways that they wish and that they feel encouraged and welcomed. Fourthly, always being the voice of the grassroots members, making sure that your views are always listened to, always heard, always respected when decisions are being made. And finally, and by no means last, making sure that we tackle the underlying problems in the party's finances, which means we tend to every few years have a bit of a financial crisis at the federal party. We need to move away from that and instead get our finances on a long-term sustainable footing. Now that's an ambitious plan, and it's a plan that goes much wider than the remit of just, for example, federal party staff and the chief executive. It's a plan for all of us, for all of the party, and that's why I want to be your president, to deliver that plan. But to deliver that sort of change, you need to really know how to make things happen in the party. And that's what I do. I've been a member in York and in Exeter and in London. I've served on local committees and regional committees and state committees. I've been a member of party staff. I've been a party strategist. I've sort of done the whole lot. And from that, I really know what is necessary to bring about change, to make us bigger and better than ever before. And you can look at my record. For example, crafting with David Howarth the core vote strategy in 2015 that has really underpinned our recovery since then, working with colleagues when the London Assembly was created to make sure we had gender balanced selection rules, something that at the time was a very novel and, dare I say, somewhat controversial move. Or whether it's really simple measures like persuading members of the Federal Policy Committee that we should start advertising for policy working group chairs so that actually every member gets a chance to apply to be one if they wish, or working with colleagues to achieve really difficult, complicated reforms like the new improved disciplinary process that we have, independent, streamlined, big step forward. So again and again, you can see my record of working successfully with colleagues to bring about change. And that's what I want to be able to do as your president. We have many brilliant people elected at all levels. We have a great new leader, we have a deputy leader, we have a growing parliamentary party. They all do great things. What the president can do, what the president can offer, is that long-term focus on getting our strategy and our organisation right so that all of us are even more successful in your future. If you elect me as president, this will be my only role in the party. I will stop working full-time, I will switch to working part-time, and this will be the only role in the party that I will have, absolutely focused and dedicated to making sure we get the strategy right, we get the organisation right, so that you and your colleagues can win bigger and better than ever before. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And commendably in time as well. So thanks very much indeed.
I'll try to keep to that record.
Okay, well, thank you. Christine.
Thank you very much, Laurelie, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen to us this evening. And I would like to flip that round, because the reason I decided to be president, and there's an apology coming up as well, the reason I decided I wanted to be president is to listen to you, because I think that's key to the president's role. It's appropriate that we're here in HQ, because it is the centre of the party, but I don't want you to see the president's role as being in HQ. The president should be your voice, should be putting your views, communicating what you want to the staff, to the parliamentarians across the road, and to the other board members, and making sure what the board members say as well, and what the policy committee, the conference committee, what they all come up with, is properly communicated throughout the party. And that's where I want to be, and what I want to be doing is being your voice every day at the heart of the party, across the road, but also coming to your conferences, your regional conferences. Your communication has to go both ways. In order to convey what the members are thinking, I have to come out and listen to what you want. Not just emails, but phone calls, surgeries at conference, visits to regional conferences, and to gather what you think in, and then be the link between you, the staff, and the elected representatives. Now, I want to go back to the staff, because I think the president's role should be a kind of non-executive one, that the president should stay out of the day-to-day decision making, should take an overview, allow the chief executive to do his job, and we do have a fantastic new chief executive, and allow the head of campaigns to do their job, the head of policy, press. These are all fantastically talented people who are doing their best for us. But more than that, I think that the president needs to be able to say to the leadership, well, the members don't agree with that. This is what the members want. The members think this is the way to do it. And to have the official backing of the party to sit in shadow cabinet every week and say, no, the members don't agree with that. So that is how I see the role. And the apology that I mentioned earlier is because a lot of you at conference said to me, was I going to do this? And I said no, that I wasn't. But I went away and I thought about it. And I spoke to my daughter, who was, if you like, the main stumbling block to this. And I said, you know, this is a fantastic time for the party. We have a fantastic opportunity. We've got some challenges. We have to improve our diversity much better than it is. We have to encourage more young members. We have to build the party. What I want to do is make sure that we make the most of that opportunity. And I think where my skills come in useful is that I can talk to the people out there who haven't yet decided, the people that we need to vote for us. I can talk to them as a representative of the party, not as the leader. The leader will be out there forming policy and talking about what we want him to do, but as a complementary voice to the leader, saying, this is who we are. Come and join us, giving them a reason to come and join us, not just the leaflets, but to come and join us and to make a difference. And that's what I want to do. And that's why I hope that I can be your next president. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, you both surpassed yourselves. That's really great, because that means we've got more time for more questions. And so I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative and come in with the first question. And it's the question about us as a party and the way that we're organised, and whether that hampers our ability to get stuff done, to make decisions. So a few years ago, a report was done by a lady called Helena Morrissey. You've all seen this, and now I'm going to show it to you. You don't need to worry. You don't need to incorporate all of that. That was her idea of how our party works. It looks like some drunken spider has crawled over that page. I mean, it really is unbelievable. And I know that we've had some reviews of the way that we're structured since. But my question to you is, what will you do about that? And I'd also like to link it in with a question from Julian Blewett from Rhondda, who says, if you were designing from scratch the Liberal Democrat organisation, not the political structures, what would it be like today? Would it be distributed across the UK? What's missing, or what needs updating? So paraphrasing Julian's question, it's kind of, if you didn't have to start from where we are, where would you start? Can I have the paper, please? Oh, yes, you can. Yes, by all means. Yes.
It really is quite a
Print you off both ones.
It's quite a thing of beauty, isn't it?
It's something else.
Yeah. You couldn't make that up, could you?
No.
And if
really,
you're starting from scratch, that's certainly not what you've come up with. What I feel very strongly about is, and I learnt this from an old boss at the BBC, is that if you move into a job, a management job, any role, even you've worked in the company for a long time, what you need to do is observe. Because from the outside, you think you know what needs changed, but it's only when you actually are on the inside that you see that you might change different things. That maybe the things you thought were unnecessary are actually necessary, and the things that you thought were completely vital, not so much. So the first thing I would do is observe exactly how the party structure works and how we actually manage to get anything remotely like common sense and strategic policy out of this, and then see where we would take it. But I have to be completely honest here and say that I wouldn't do it now, because we've got a general election just round the corner. And if we are caught at a general election looking in the way, looking at our internal party structures, then I don't think the country will ever forgive us. Because if there's a general election, we need to be looking out there to the voters, and that needs to be our priority. But when the election was over, I would have observed for several months, listened to what all of you had to say, and come up with something possibly less complicated than that and slightly prettier. And if I was starting from scratch, then there are a few things that I would start fundamentally, slimline the structure. A board with fewer people. Diversity and gender balance built into every single role in the party. Bring more young people in, more ideas. Rotate things so that you couldn't sit on one board for 20 years. Institutional memory is vital, but you have to pass it on, and you have to bring new people in. So it would be slimmer, it would be more diverse, it would be gender balanced, and it would also be geographically sensible. That's what I'd do.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Christine's quite right that we can't be looking inward at a time of a general election. The tricky thing, obviously, is we might have not just a general election before Christmas, but next year, who knows, another general election, quite possible if we have a hung parliament, perhaps a referendum as well. So I think one of the things I can offer in this role, I was just having a look at this and thinking how many of these different bodies have I served on at some point, that I can offer that understanding right from day one of how our somewhat complicated at times party system works, and therefore right from day one being able to help make sure we're making the right decisions to get as many people elected to run as many winning campaigns as possible. And I think one of the key elements of what we need to improve in our organisation, and this comes back to the question, Laurelie, is that at the moment, if you're interested in getting involved locally in maybe delivering leaflets, canvassing, running social events, etc., we sort of know what to do with you. We're not always perfect at following up on leads by all means, but we sort of know what to do. The big gap where so many people who have got so much to offer end up trying to get involved and then slipping away a little bit disillusioned with the party is if you've got some real skills and ability to add that are not geographic, but maybe skills as a computer coder, maybe skills at doing crisis management in press offices, those sorts of skills which are not geographically specific, we so often need, but we so often let waste away. So the big missing element, and what I think we need anyway, but I would certainly include if I was creating something from scratch, is a much stronger and broader set of party bodies and other organisations such as Lib Dem Software Group, which I helped create and have been very supportive to its growth, to make sure that if you've got a great skill to offer, but it's not geographically specific, we still have a route by which you can get involved in the party, because we so need every little bit of help that we can get.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. The next question comes from Joyce Onstad from Ealing, and it's similar. It's about governance, and her question is: given that one of the key roles of the party president is to chair the federal board, what one thing would you do to make the board more effective? So the federal board is the overall executive board. It's like in a company, it would be the board that makes all the decisions, and all the other things kind of come underneath. But hopefully not that many by the time either of these two have finished with it. So, Mark, would you like to start off this time?
I think it's a really good question that Joyce asks. I think the key element with getting the most out of the people who put in, huge amounts of time, very talented colleagues who choose to try, to spend time serving on the board. The key thing is to make sure that we have a much clearer remit on the board about our strategic role. And any of you who've been involved, say, in a charity or a not-for-profit will know that actually that can often be a little bit of a struggle, but there's a very clear and common pattern about well-performing boards of trustees and other similar governing boards where the focus is on the strategic. There is obviously always some day-to-day emergency items that do need to be dealt with, but we need to have a consistent focus on strategic decision-making. Just to give you one example, the way in which the election expense rules and party finance rules and so on have changed over the years means that now when there's a general election, there's huge pressure on to spend a very large amount of money right up front. It's almost the opposite of the spending pattern from 20 or 30 years ago where you try to build to a crescendo at the end of the campaign. There's now a huge financial pressure up front. That has all sorts of implications for what do we need our balance sheet to look like, what should a budget look like, how do we make sure we've got the right emergency loans available if we get caught out by a surprise election we weren't expecting and so on. Some of those are quite important technical issues, some of them are quite big strategic issues, and that's the sort of issue that we need to focus on when instead actually I think it's fair to say that board discussions at the moment quite often get drawn into quite a lot of micro detail. Sometimes that's really important, sometimes it gives you a really good hint, bit of detail about something that might not quite be going right, but we really need that strategic focus running through all that we do on the board.
Okay, thank you. Christine.
Thank you very much. Like Mark, I currently sit on the federal board, and I think if there was one thing that I was going to do, it would be to find a way of amalgamating some things and slimming it down, because while I think it's important that we have a representative body that's as big as the board and represents all the groups, although if you think about this drawing, it's why we've got such a big board. I think we could actually do with a more focused board, which was more inclusive of the SAOs, for example, and represented different voices in the party quite clearly, but maybe fewer at the if you like, the board table, because British Aerospace, I think, has about a dozen people run it or whatever. So I think probably the one thing I would do is try and make the board at its heart a bit sharper, a bit more effective, but also a bit more outward looking and a bit more encouraging of comments from elsewhere. Bring in, as I say, the SEOs. Make it much more about discussing, as Mark says, the strategy of the party. Think about the big picture and let the staff and the volunteers with the skills, let them deal with the day-to-day running of things and keep the board out of it. Because at the end of the day, the more people you have, it's an old saying, too many cooks and all of that, but the more people you have in a decision making process, the more difficult it is to make decisions and make clear decisions. And the one thing we need above all else going into general election is clarity.
Indeed it is. Who was it that said, a camel is a horse designed by a board? We have our challenges, but I'm sure that we're, with either of these people, we'll certainly face them really well. Right, I want to move on now to some diversity and inclusion questions. We had a lot of questions, but I picked one from James Campion of Ribble Valley because it was really succinct, and we don't want to listen to us talking, we want to listen to your response. So the question is, how do we bring about a more diverse party to ensure that we look like the nation we seek to represent? So Christine first, I think.
Thank you for that question, because I think that is possibly the single biggest question that we have to tackle going forward. Finance, how we run the party is important, but there is no point in getting that right if we don't appeal to voters, and we're never going to appeal to voters if we don't look like them. I have a very good friend in Glasgow who used to be a member of the Liberal Democrats and now is a member of another party, and I said to her, why? She said she got fed up with the fact that we simply didn't look like her. That is what we have to get right. Apart from which, not only do we not look like the country, we're not representing the country. We're not bringing in everyone. We're not getting everyone's views. It's important to have that diversity of voices, that diversity of views. If we're going to have a really democratic country that's open and tolerant, that is how we have to be ourselves. And that's what the voters have to see. For example, if you look at someone, you look at me. I look like an ordinary middle class, straight, white woman. Maybe gender balance is the one thing I face, but we don't actually know that. You don't know that. I might be bisexual. I might have a hidden disability. I might not actually be white. I might be Roma. So we have to stop looking at diversity as putting people in groups and look at the individuals and look at how each individual is diverse and encourage them to come in. And the more we do that, the more people we will bring in from different communities. Because if we don't represent that community at all, they're never going to come to us. And if we don't do that, we don't deserve their votes, or for that matter, probably anybody else's, because that is what we should be, that is what we seek to represent, and if we should act the way we want the country to be.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, it's a really good question, James. So thank you for asking it, because it is... Overall, our record, as I said up front, is quite patchy in this area. There has been some fantastic progress made recently, and I think particularly everyone involved in the Lib Dem campaign for racial equality and the racial diversity campaign should deserve credit for just how much of an impact they've had. in only a few short months on our selection of parliamentary candidates. Fingers crossed, if we have an election before Christmas, we'll have a massively more diverse parliamentary party than we ever had before. So there are some things that we're getting right, and we need to do more of that. In particular, though, I think we need to make sure that we properly implement actually all of the Morrissey report, from which this complicated diagram came, and the Alderdice report. Those were two major reviews the party commissioned from real experts in different areas that are absolutely relevant to this topic. We've made some good progress on some of the areas, but we haven't yet implemented all of the reports. And in a way, it's always going to be a job that needs doing. It's not like you can say, right, we sorted diversity, tick, let's now go on to think about something else. Yeah. But there are some basic things. For example, the Morrissey report recommended we do an annual survey to make sure we are on top of some of the issues, what the trends are and so on. That survey has never got going. That's the sort of thing we need to fix. We need to make sure happens. And we need to continue to be willing to have those at times quite tough debates in the party about changing party rules as necessary to help encourage diversity. I was sort of one of the people who helped the team that was at the heart of introducing the all-women shortlist rules. Really important change. I know very controversial, and myself, I'd so much rather we're in a world where a measure like that wasn't in the end required. But you look at our persistent record of failure in that respect. Sometimes something really difficult does have to be the step that we take, and that's what we need to do. And that's why I think the role of president is so important, because some of those controversial decisions are ones that party staff quite rightly should stay neutral in, but we do need to be willing to have a serious and sustained focus, because as Christine quite rightly said, and as the questioner said, this is a crucial issue.
Thank you very much. Right, and just on the diversity and inclusion forum, we actually had a predominance of male questions, so if any women want to ask supplementaries, please do feel free to write in. Okay, so we're now coming on to a couple of policy questions, beloved by this party. The first one comes from Peter Handford-Styring of Sheffield, and he says, we need to be seen as more than a single policy, open brackets, Brexit or student fees, close brackets, party. What do you think is the killer policy that will lead to voters choosing the Lib Dems at a general election?
Is it me first? Yeah.
Yes.
I think I would actually slightly disagree with the premise of your question, Peter, because sometimes policy is absolutely crucial, but one of the big drivers behind voter choice is whether they perceive a party or a candidate to share their values. And actually, it's that values-based approach that's the sort of thing that David Howarth and I have sort of championed in our core votes approach. And I think the party's been really successful in beginning to adapt and think about, because very often what people view policy as is almost a sign of actually, does the party really understand me? Does it share my values? And you've got to get those underlying points right, because otherwise the policy stuff doesn't have traction in swaying votes. So I think the direct answer to your question is, for the moment, Brexit is not only the most important issue facing the country, but a really clear and distinct policy position that we can have that is relevant to people's lives, but crucially also illustrates our values, because it's about our openness, it's about our toleration, it's about our embrace of people from other countries who wish to come here and make their lives here and contribute to our society. So I think, Brexit is absolutely crucial, but we must always talk about it in that context of how it illustrates our values. We must be consistent about continuing to promote our values, because that's what will build us a bigger core vote. That's what will therefore give us that much better a starting point in future elections, so that we don't start way behind other parties, but actually we start up there equal with them. And then all the brilliant campaigning that candidates can do, and all the tactical vote squeeze that we can get from all of those bar charts through letterboxes, if they can build on a much bigger core vote based on our values, we'll be starting at a much better point and will therefore be winning even more often.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you. It's a very good question. What is the killer policy? Well, the funny thing is, I've knocked a lot of doors, an awful lot of doors over the years, and people have never said to me, what is your one policy? But they do always say, what is it you stand for? Where are you in politics? And why should I vote for you? And coming back to Brexit, I think what it has done is given us a chance to tell people who we are and what we stand for. I remember during the last general election, it was supposed to be about Brexit. I seem to remember Theresa May was going to get this massive landslide victory. And actually it did come down to one policy in the end, the dementia tax. But not because of that policy, but because of what it said about the Tories. I was at Hustings in Edinburgh, where an elderly gentleman in the audience said, and I'll never forget this, he felt that this Conservative government was punishing him for getting old, for growing old. They were punishing him. That broke my heart. But not because it was a specific policy, but because it said exactly what people think that government stood for. Now, what we have to do is say exactly what we stand for. And what Brexit allows us to do is do simply that. And the language that Joe is using, the stance Joe is taking, is clear. It says, we are people who believe in the European Union. We're internationalists. We want to stop Brexit. And in Scotland, it also says, we want to be part of the United Kingdom. We're inclusive people. We build coalitions around us. And that tells people that we're open, we're tolerant, we're progressive. And that's what I think it is. That Brexit policy will allow us to have the killer stance that says to people who we are, what we believe in, and why they should vote for us.
Thank you very much. Really thoughtful. Got another one on policy. This is from William Tench of South Northamptonshire, and it follows on very nicely actually from the last question. He says, the next general election will probably be early in your term as a president, maybe very early. What will you do in your remaining term to ensure that we are successful in the one after that? Who's going first? I've forgotten.
Oh, I think it's me.
It's you, I think, yeah.
That's a very good question. And that brings us back actually to the drunk spider and the what would we do, because you're right, I think we will have a general election very early into the term. And at that point, I think the president's role will be crucial in putting forward the party's position and things, an alternative voice, a media profile. Now, after that, that will still be important. But hopefully we'll have even more MPs than we've got now. And at that point, it becomes even more important that the party president is right at the heart of that and putting forward the members' views, but also listening, I suppose, to what the party is saying as well, going back and forward. And at that point, once it's settled down, once we are in power and we know what we're doing and we've got our mandate, if you like, then having observed for 6 months to a year and looked at where the structures can be improved to ensure that going forward we continue to encourage people, we continue to grow, that's when I would start to look at change, start to look at the federal structure, make sure we protect the federal structure, but also use the role of president to go out there, to get around the country and say to people, look at what we're doing, look at what's happening, how we're changing this country, come and join us. To go on television. For example, Reporting Scotland, my local programme, has 600,000 viewers every night. I remember when Jim Wallace was leading the Scottish Liberal Democrats, we were on that programme every night and we ended up in government in Scotland. That's the key. Once we are through this general election, we need to be using that platform to build on to the next one, to be talking to people in all forms of media, social media, television, radio, all the time. That's what I would be doing while going ahead with the reforms I had spotted that we needed to do.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it may be the general election happens before Christine or I get to take up the post, as we would take up, whichever one of us wins would get to take up the post on the 1st of January. So it's possible we will be straight into that second period that you mentioned, William. And I think the thing we must remember, though, is even if there's, let's say, a general election in November, December time, there will still be, we know for sure, a crucial round of elections in May. And we're doing this webinar from London. There will be, for example, election for the Mayor of London, where we've got a real opportunity for the first time to win that election. We've got lots of council elections across the country, all sorts of places where we've got an opportunity to maybe get the first councillor on the council or to get control of the council. And continuing to see elections at every single level as being absolutely crucial for the party is the way we not only set up the best Westminster election results in due course, because don't forget what an enormous impact this May's local elections had on our subsequent possibilities for a general election result, but also all elections at all those other levels are so valuable in their own right. It's always a fun debating point: who has more power, a Liberal Democrat leader of a council or a backbench Lib Dem MP in Parliament? We could probably debate that for quite a few hours, but there are now 50 Liberal Democrat council leaders or co-leaders across the country. Many of them are facing elections next May, and so that's why I keep on coming back to this point that I think the key role of the president is to keep us focused as an organisation, getting the organisation right, getting the strategy right, because it's so tempting, so easy if you're in the heart of the Westminster bubble to get sucked into thinking about just the next Westminster news cycle and just the next parliamentary election when there's so much else we need to do. 50, remember, Liberal Democrat council leaders or co-leaders, they absolutely need the party to be delivering the right organisation for them, just as our MPs do.
Thank you very much. We have a question just come in.
Excellent.
From Beth in Birmingham. And the question is, how do you plan to include young people who aren't yet old enough to vote in the party? Well, that's an excellent question. Well done. So, Mark, I think it's your turn.
It's an excellent set of questions again. I think one of the good things is we already have rules that allow people who are not yet old enough to vote to, for example, be able to join the party, to be able to take part in many of the party's activities. And we've also got increasingly better at that very important side of making sure that we take proper care of younger people who are getting involved in the party as well, and making sure that we've got proper safeguards and processes in place. But fundamentally, I think one of the things that it often holds back younger people from getting involved in the party is actually an issue that applies across many other age ranges as well. And that's, we tend as a party to rely on people who can spend lots of times on early weekday evenings at meetings, out campaigning, and who can afford to spend a fair amount of money on going to things like Federal Party Conference. So some of the things we need to do to make it easier for people to get involved in the party at all levels will particularly, I think, help younger people. And to give you an example of that, just you think about Federal Party Conference. Within the sort of a reasonable, maybe 1 hour travel time of Federal Party Conference, wherever it takes place, is a huge number of party members. But we say to almost all of those party members, if you want to come to conference and maybe hear the leader's speech or come to the leader's Q&A, you've got to pony up a lot of money to be at the very minimum buy a day ticket for the whole day. We don't, for example, say, actually, you know what, why not, if you've never been to conference before, why not be allowed to come along just for a 2 hour slot rather than having to come and pay up a lot of money for a whole day, because that's a big obstacle we're putting in the way of people. So I think we've really got to focus again and again on making it as easy as possible for people to get involved, to be as flexible as possible to reflect different varied lifestyles, different levels of income and so on, and not simply assume, oh yeah, you can afford 100, 200 quid to go away and off to an event for a whole day.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question, Beth, and I have to say I'm tempted to say set Joe Swinson on them, because my daughter joined the party at the age of 13 after sitting down and chatting to Joe for 10 minutes at somewhere that I was meeting somebody for a cup of coffee. Joe was also there, and Joe persuaded her. Now, the key to that, I think, is talking to young people. And I'd like to say at this point that for me, attracting young people and diversity go hand in hand, because if you bring young people in, you will have a more diverse party, because naturally young people have a much easier you get a much more diverse, any young group of people, you get a much more diverse group. And I think the key is going out to young people. I'd kind of quite like to, if I was president, give somebody the actual role of going out and talking to people and setting up events in areas, making sure that every local party does something once a month, once every 2 months, that's geared at young people. In my constituency, we have pastries on a Saturday morning. We have coffee and pastry. Some have pizza and politics, but there's a gap there. You know, pizza and politics tends to be in a pub, and pastries tend to be in a coffee shop. So you've got two age groups, quite well catered for. The younger age groups, who are not going to go anywhere to drink and don't want to go to a coffee shop for a Danish pastry and a cup of coffee, they're the ones that we need to find a way of getting to. It can be in the youth club, it can be, you know, table tennis night, it can be a disco, it can be something that they want. And the key to that is getting a young person to tell you what they want. We can come up with something, but it won't be what young people want. We need young people to tell us, and we need to listen to them and then do it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very thoughtful responses. Last but one question comes from Richard Hunt of Central Bedfordshire. This is a political one. He says, given the political crisis at this moment, if a general election is called and both Conservative and Labour parties are far short of 326 seats, which they would need to form an overall majority, would you support Joe and Ed to form a unity government of moderates and centralists and play an active role in the cabinet? So that's you, yes.
Yeah, Richard, that's a cracker of a question, because there's probably not a politician or a voter or MD in this country who hasn't thought of the last few months. What happens if there's a general election? Well, at the moment, we're actually trying to form a government, or the idea of who would lead a government of national unity if there was a no confidence vote. And the question that you've raised is central to that. Who would lead it? Who would be the moderates? I think my answer in general terms is yes. If we could continue to grow as we have done and be this movement that brings people in, not a narrow movement sitting on the edge of, you know, politics, being purist about our ideals, but a broad church that says, come and join us, come from the Labour Party, come from the Conservatives. You've criticised us in the past, but you know what? You've been on a journey. Come and join us and build a government with us. I think if we could do that, then we might actually do what our aim has always been, which is to change British politics. Then we would get proportional representation. We might even get federalism if we were at the centre of it. What we'd have to be careful of is that we didn't go into another coalition where we were the junior partner and that, you know, the other party took the credit for all our ideas. We'd have to be very careful. I worked for the coalition. I was a special advisor. Been there. don't want to go there again. I'm sure Lovely wouldn't either.
No.
But I think the idea of Joe and Ed at the centre of a wide movement which pulls people in and has a government of a coalition in a way, but more coalesced around us than two parties. I think that could work, and I think we have to look forward to this motion of no confidence and see if we can actually get something that begins to move towards that with that.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I think the idea of a hung parliament like that both fills me with pleasure and dread. Pleasure because of the opportunity it might give us, the sort of power that we might be able to wield, and dread because of the number of ways in which it could go so badly wrong. So I think as your president, there would be three things I would really try to make sure we all remain focused on. One is that in the preceding election, we have kept that focus on our values and building our core vote, because then if we have difficult decisions to make in a hung parliament, people, our supporters, are much more likely to understand and be supportive of them if they feel that is a logical continuation of the reason why they voted for us at the preceding election. So one, keep going with the strategy. The second is to make sure that in whatever complicated and difficult negotiations there may be, that the voice of members is always heard, because party members and party activists will be absolutely crucial to making a success of whatever happens, because we will need to carry on campaigning successfully as a party. We'll need to carry on having hundreds of thousands of volunteers slugging their guts out to get MPs re-elected in the next election. So members, absolutely central. And thirdly, we need to be much more intensive in our internal communications. Now, we probably all have got a few jokes to make about the number of emails we receive asking for money, and that's because the party genuinely needs to raise a huge amount of money to be able to try and keep up with Labour and the Tories. But we also need to have a much better culture of internal communications so that people feel they really understand the reasons behind what will at some points be quite tricky trade-offs that have to be made. And on that, in a way, you can look at my track record, the way that I run now the most read unofficial Liberal Democrat website, the fact that in the last year I've sent nearly 2 million emails in total to members and activists. Exactly. So I've got a consistent record of being absolutely committed to communicating with members and to responding to members. And that, I think, will be a vital skill in any sort of hung parliament tricky situation.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Right, final question, and it will lead you in nicely, hopefully, to your 2-minute summaries at the end. So this comes from James Bergen. I hope I got your name pronounced correctly, James, and forgive me if I haven't. And that is, he's from Glasgow. One of you is an MP. The other not.
Which one?
Well, I have the initials, so you know. So.
What are the advantages stroke disadvantages of your respective positions? And can we have disadvantages as well, please?
Ooh, you're making us answer the question properly.
Yes,
Yeah.
Why not?
Okay, so I think I'm first, aren't I?
Yes.
So it is traditional in many ways in the party that we have a parliamentarian as our party president. So in one sense, one disadvantage that I have by not being an MP or a peer is that I'm slightly unusual in putting myself forward for president and hoping to get elected. So I think that's one thing, breaking the mould a little bit in one sense. The second is, and I think this is a disadvantage but also an advantage, is not being an MP means you're not in the heart of all of that day-to-day parliamentary activity. And I absolutely acknowledge there can be some drawbacks to that, which is why if you elect me as president, it'll be really crucial that I make sure I'm closely in touch with people all the time. But moving on to the advantages, I think that's also an advantage. I mentioned earlier how, for example, we have 50 Liberal Democrat council leaders or co-leaders around the country. We have great people in the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, in Brussels, the London Assembly, and all sorts of other levels of government across the country. And what the party overall needs to do is to support and foster and work with and serve everyone all across the party. So in that sense, I think actually being one step removed from one particular very time intensive, very concentration sapping part of the political process is actually quite helpful, because it'll make it much easier, it will make it much more possible for me to keep my eye on the ball for all of us.
Thank you. Christine.
Well, the disadvantage I would say is that probably you're all looking and saying she's busy. She's already doing Home Affairs, Justice, see, I've forgotten already.
Equalities.
Women and Equalities, thank you, Lorelei, and Deputy Chief Whip. But obviously, as we have more MPs after the election, in fact, we've now got more MPs before the election, I won't have all those roles. That's been a necessity of numbers. So that is a disadvantage. A disadvantage is that I'm here, that I am very close physically to headquarters and to the staff and to all the elected representatives are the advantage. Because as a parliamentarian, I am, as Mark said, at the heart of what is happening in Westminster. And if I make the effort as your president and I get out there and I have the surgeries and I do the webinars when there's an important event and I communicate with people one-to-one, personally, have conversations, and I know what the members are thinking, then I don't have to make an appointment to see Joe. I see Joe every day, and I can just say, look, Joe, you're on the wrong track with this, and members don't like it. Now, I saw this firsthand in the coalition when Tim Farron was the president, and Tim Farron was able to sit in meetings. Lawley was there as well, and everybody in the room knew that Tim was talking about the members. So you're at the heart of it, you're close to it. 85% of what the president does is here, roundabout. It's also a full-time job. And being here, I have the resources in Parliament, personal and in terms of my staff, to make sure that I'm not run off my feet or spread too thinly. I've got support and I've got help. And I think that's the advantage. That, and I've already got a media profile to be out there selling the party to the people who are not yet members, but we want to bring in.
Thank you. Thank you both very much indeed, because you have stuck to time. Wow.
Run the train system.
None of my staff or family will believe that.
Well, maybe
Luckily, you've got the
they're,
evidence on
yeah,
camera.
maybe they're watching. So, and for that reason, we've managed to get a good wide range of questions, which you've answered very candidly, and I thank you both. We now come to the final bit of this evening, which is your 2 minutes sum up, and it's for Christine to start off.
Well, thank you. Thank you actually to Laurelie as well, and to the girls for looking after us tonight and for running this webinar, which I think is important to allow everybody to have access. And you'll notice there are words that I've repeated quite often: observe, listen, and communicate. Because to me, that's what the president should be. A non-executive who is there to communicate between the members and parliament and staff, members, and be at the centre of that communication. And also, if we're going to continue to grow as the wide movement that we all have a vision of now, then we can't just keep talking to ourselves. We can't just keep looking inwardly. We have to look out the way. We have to reach those people who are not at federal conference, who are not getting emails, who are not actively going out and looking for the Liberal Democrats. And that's where I think I can make a difference as well, because I've already got the media profile. I'm already on television and radio as an MP and can encourage them to come into the party. But not just on the media. I want to get out around the country to all the regional and state party meetings. I want to come to the occasional local meeting which is not a dinner, although I am looking forward to all the dinners, and just listen to the membership, get a feel for things. You can't get a feel for things unless you're in the room. You can't get a feel for things unless you talk to people personally. And that's what I want to do. I want to be a president for you and to do it one-to-one with all of you. Be a personal president. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark.
Thank you. And thank you both to Laurelie and also the staff who have been very kindly working into the evening to support us in making this webinar happen. And thank you also to everyone who's been listening and who has asked so many really good questions. We've had lots of really good ideas and important issues raised. But in a way, that's the easy bit. It's relatively easy to come up with a nice long wish list of things that we think we must or should do better. The really difficult bit is actually making that change happen and bringing it about quickly, because day in, day out, people are activists. Every week there are council by-elections. There are massive elections happening across many bits of the country next May, and people deserve a party that gets its strategy and its organisation right and helps more and helps quickly and helps sooner. And I think if you look at my track record, you can see that I'm the sort of person who can deliver that. I've talked a few times this evening about the role I've played in creating and bringing in the core vote strategy for the party. Let me just give you one other quick example, something I did earlier this year working with ALDC to raise money so that Liberal Democrats from 7 areas currently without Liberal Democrat councillor are getting now an intensive programme of campaign support through to next May, the first Liberal Democrat councillor in each of those 7 areas. That was a key example, seeing a problem, coming up with a solution, getting on with implementing it, and that's what you'll get with me as president. If you elect me, I will switch from working full-time to part-time employment, and this will be my only role in the party. I won't have a constituency to look after. I won't have a portfolio in Parliament to have to be dedicated to. This will be my only role in the party, and that role will be working flat out to ensure even more of us can win, even more of us can succeed, and therefore even more of our Liberal Democrat policies get put into practice, making the country and our society better and more liberal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I feel really inspired now, and I hope you do too. Thank you both so much for coming along, and thank you to Audrey and to the technical team as well for helping to set all of this up, and most of all, thank you who have taken the trouble to listen in, watch, and I hope that your task in selecting who you want for your next president, well, not going to be any easier, is it really? But you've got a better idea, I think, of the talents that we have, because we are a party of all the talents, and I feel very proud really to be here and to have chaired this hustings tonight, and you know, it's quite something, isn't it? I think we are a party that's on the move, on the up. Our tails are up. And who knows where we might go from here. So with the right president, I'm sure that will happen. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.